Welcome to the History of the Middle East with Dr. Brovkin. Today we continue our survey of 11th century, and the main topic is the beginning of Crusades. So Crusades is a huge topic. There's tons of books and movies and documentaries written about it. It's quite complex, and to the present day, many Arab leaders still speak about Crusades as the greatest insult that had been done to the Muslim world by the Christians. Now, up front, when we go over these events, one should say that in defense of the Crusaders, that they did not want to convert everybody to Christianity. This is not the case. Whereas, from the Christian point of view, what the Muslims did when they came to Christian areas, they didn't force them, but they welcomed it. And many, many Egyptians, millions of them, came to be Muslim at the end, and of course about 10% of Egyptians stayed Christian to the present time. So at least this charge should not be levied against the Crusaders, because they came to conquer Jerusalem. That was their purpose, but it was not to convert local people to Christianity. But let's get back to the original story as to why it happened, what actually happened, and how it unfolded. So for that, we need to look at the situation in the Middle East in 1090s. As you already know, Egypt was ruled by the Fatimids, and then there were small principalities, so it splintered up. You had a caliph in Baghdad that didn't rule much over anything except Baghdad, and then there was a principality in Persia, its own Shia principality, and then there was one in Damascus, which was called Rum, R-U-M, which is a distortion of the word Rome. Essentially, it was a Seljuk Turks who called their state Rome, pretty much because that was originally a part of the Roman Empire. Don't forget, Syria was a part of the Roman Empire. And the territory that they controlled was today's Syria and half of today's Anatolia, which is Turkey today. So Asia Minor or Anatolia, that is Seljuk Turks that call themselves Roma. Then there was a principality in Antioch, which is a big important fortress further out east, and then Mosul, which is today in Iraq. So all of these were small principalities, and the big rivalry was between Seljuk Turks and Fatimids in Egypt. They were actually at war, pretty much, and Jerusalem was actually taken over for a while by the Seljuk Turks, and then won back by the Fatimids. So Fatimids and Seljuk Turks are at war. And here is when, into that atmosphere, the political situation, the Crusaders would come. So who are the Crusaders we'll examine in a minute, but how did it start? It started out with the emperor of the Byzantine Empire. His name is Alexei. And he writes a letter which actually sets things going. He writes a letter to the Pope in Rome, and the Pope's name is Urban II. So Alexis writes a letter to Pope Urban saying, please help, because Byzantine Empire is losing territory in Anatolia or in Asia Minor. All of it was a part of the Byzantine Empire. As you know, in 638, Byzantine Empire lost Syria to the Muslim invasion from Arabia, and then they lost Egypt, and then they lost the rest of Iraq, and now Anatolia itself is half of it is lost. And if things go the way they do, they're going to be at the doors of at the walls of Constantinople pretty soon. So that is the reason. The reason Alexei writes to Pope is because they are afraid of being overrun by Seljuk Turks, who are pushing more and more into westward towards Constantinople. Now, Urban receives the letter and he convenes a council, and he decides to actually help. But there's a very, very important point. Uh, there's what I call a substitution occurs. Uh, what Alexei asked for is a European help to defend Byzantine Empire from the Turks. There was not a mention at all, none. There was no mention of Jerusalem. But Urban substitutes the request of Alexei to provide help to defend Byzantine Empire and Constantinople as if what he really wants is to send a European force to conquer Jerusalem, a birthplace and the execution place. Actually, he was not born there. He's born in Nazareth. But anyway, where Jesus was crucified, the sacred land, which is called in Europe the Holy Land of Jerusalem. Now, again, Alexei did not mention Jerusalem at all. But Urban substitutes that. Why does he do that? Because, I think, uh, the call to help a Byzantine emperor would not generate much support in Europe. Maybe a few princes would send a token force. But to excite the people to really do something that would put them in history would be to conquer Jerusalem. That is something exciting, something worthy to liberate from the infidels the land of Jesus. That really got to be quite popular. And he was right when he called in on the European princes that the purpose is to go and liberate Jerusalem, the Holy Cross, the Holy Sepulchre, which actually was destroyed by Hakim. So they held a grudge against the Muslims for doing that. It actually was tremendously popular response, to a point where Urban did not even anticipate that there would be such a welcome reception to his call. So in 1095, Alexei writes a letter, and already in 1096 there are three waves or three different groups or troops marching towards Constantinople. Three different ones. They are known in history as the wave number one is Peter the Hermit. That's the name of the guy, Peter the Hermit. He leads what is known in history as the popular crusade, or simply volunteers. He's a monk, and he actually is excited by the idea to go and reconquer Jerusalem, and he basically leads a troop of volunteers. That's 30,000 or 40,000, a lot of men who basically pick up whatever they seeking adventure, an axe or weapon or whatever, and they're walking. They're walking through the Balkans from Italy towards Constantinople in this vain attempt to reach Jerusalem. They're poorly organized. They're not trained militarily. And frankly, it's pretty much a suicidal mission. They don't know what they're getting into. Jerusalem is quite far away. And, you have to provide food and nourishment and weapons. And they are getting into big trouble. And they're the first ones to actually reach Constantinople. And they're a rowdy match. They're a bunch of really unorganized detachments. And they do attack a Muslim city, and they massacre people there, and they steal and rob and everything else. And then the second time they tried, they're devastated by the more organized resistance of the Turks. So they're pretty much wiped out very, very early after their first encounter with the Turks in the city, a small city, I think it's Nicaea, around Constantinople. And it is in 1095, 96, that the real armies come. And these are the armies that are well organized, well armed, and they're sort of separately marching to Constantinople, which is the dukes and the brothers of the king. And here is their name. Count Vernandoa the brother of a French king, Raymond IV, the Duke of Toulouse, and Toulouse at that time was pretty much like a separate kingdom. Uh, then there were detachments of the Pope, detachments from Lombardy, which is from northern Italy, which is a separate kingdom, and from Germany. And all of them are separate. They actually speak separate, different languages, whilst more educated people, of course, spoke Latin as well. But the biggest contingent is that of the Franks, as they were called, which is the French knights, led by uh, Count Bernardo, brother of the king. So these are the ones, they're all marching in and they're all separate and they all converge. They come to Constantinople in 1096. When they come to Constantinople, a very important event happens. They realize that Jerusalem is very far away and they would need help from the Byzantine emperor. They cannot just walk over remaining 1,000 kilometers without them. They came to help him, but they tell him that they came not just to find the Turks, but their much more ambitious goal is to march on to Jerusalem. To which Alexis says, well, yes, that's fine. I will provide you help, but on one condition. What's the condition? The condition is that all the lands that you will conquer will be Byzantine Empire. You will be my vassals. Now, this is a medieval form of governorship, the same as in Western Europe. Basically, you have the emperor. The emperor is the only one who has the right to appoint kings. And the king has a right to appoint dukes and herzogs and others, owners, who are his vassals, which means they work for him. So basically, Alexis says nominally, all that land would be mine. You would be my vassal. In actual fact, it would be yours. I mean, they will be ruling it, governing it. Just theoretically, they would be under the command and control of the Byzantine emperor. Now, that offer seems to be normal. Why not? But what about the Pope? The Pope who sent them there wanted all these lands to be under the rule of the Pope. Now, don't forget that Alexei is the head of the Eastern Orthodox Church. The emperor is simultaneously the leader of the Christians, and the Christian church there is the Orthodox one. The Pope is the leader of the Catholics. So how are they going to square that out? That they will be the subordinates of vassals of a Byzantine emperor and at the same time somehow spread Christianity. They never figured it out, but they didn't care. They gave a promise, which is an oath, which is, it's a sin to break an oath, that they will, in fact, go to Jerusalem and liberate it, and this would become Byzantine Empire. Partly they kept their word, because if you come today to Jerusalem, the biggest presence of Christians and the Holy Sepulchre itself belongs to the Greek Orthodox Church, not to the Catholics. So the Greek Orthodox presence in the Middle East is obviously the one that is much more powerful than any other Christians. In any case, this is an important detail, that the Byzantines do provide help, and without that help, they wouldn't have made it. It is important. They do provide them food and ammunition and detachments, and they also provide them scouts who know the roads and the mountains, and it's a very, very arduous journey that they will have several battles with the Turks in Asia Minor as they move on. So the time frame basically is that they leave in 96 and they come to Antioch in the following year, 97, and they get stuck. So Antioch is on the Mediterranean. It's a big, big fortress. Even today, the walls are survived that show what a powerful fortress it was, and still is to be seen. So before the Antioch, they have to traverse all of Anatolia, and Anatolia is mountainous in the eastern part, and it's quite difficult. They run out of food, they suffer casualties. It's not an easy journey. They do meet the Turks. The Turks have fantastic cavalry, and they fight really well. But in the first encounters, you could see several advantages of the Crusaders militarily, and several advantages of the Turks. So the advantage of the Turks is they have really good archers. They had a unique force of huge archers that they actually use their feet to shoot an arrow, and it would fly very far away. The Europeans didn't have archers like that at all. So that was the advantage, and they did very, very well in first encounters. But the Europeans were stronger in their heavy armor because the knights had heavily armored horses and shields and spears. And when you have this kind of a knights cavalry with hundreds of heavily armored shields, horses charging in the battlefield, they're virtually impossible to stop. European horses were heavier because they were bred to sustain this armor of the knights. And therefore, they were a formidable military force. And so they come to to Antioch, and they realize this is like incredible fortress. There's no way we can take it. And they besiege Antioch, and they don't know what to do. Then the news comes that the Turkish army Seljuk Turks army is approaching Antioch. And if it comes there, they're done, they're finished, they will lose because they're in the open field and they have not been able to take Antioch. And when the Turkish army arrives, that will be the end of it. They only had about 30,000 left. But then there was something fortunate that happened, which was a trick. They contacted somebody inside, and the story is that this was a Christian who helped them. And he opened the gate at night to a few of the knights who entered the city, and then opened up the big gates into which the Crusaders rushed into, and they took over Antioch by this trick, which was very, very fortunate for them, because if they had not taken Antioch in time, they would have lost. Because a month after that, a big Turkish army arrived, and now the Turkish army had to besiege Antioch with its huge fortress, huge guns, and the defensive positions that now the Crusaders were at an advantage by controlling Antioch. So they actually won. They defeated the Turks in around Antioch, and they proceeded to Jerusalem. On the way, they took Edessa. Edessa was still a Christian principality, which is in southern Anatolia or southwest, pretty much where today's border with Syria is. That was Christian, and one of the knights stayed there, and again, by a trick, became the ruler and took over that land. Then they proceeded down to what today would be Lebanon, and they took Tyre, and finally they approached Jerusalem in 1099. Now, if any of you know the geography of Jerusalem, Jerusalem is about less than 100 kilometers from the coast, and it's in the area which is on one side is a desert, on the other side it's green. And even today, like if you look from the Dome of the Rock east, it's a desert. There's pretty much nothing there. But if you look north and east, this is where the green lands are and pastures are. In other words, they besieged Jerusalem, they surrounded it, and after about a month of a siege, they took Jerusalem. And this is one of the most resented moments in the history of the Crusaders, and something that the Muslims remember to the present day, which is a massacre. When the Crusaders took Jerusalem, they killed pretty much all Muslims and the Jews. Now, let's not forget the Jews too. They killed the Muslims and the Jews, and it was totally devastating massacre. Even the Orthodox Christians sometimes were not spared. It was a total bloodbath, and it kind of poisoned the relations of Crusaders with the locals for a long, long time to come. They did not try to convert them; they were just killing them. And that established this sort of hostility and enmity between the two for a long time. So we'll stop at that. The conquest of Jerusalem with its very tragic end for its inhabitants. Now, for the next 80 some years, the coast of Mediterranean, the eastern coast, will be Crusader kingdoms, and the kingdom, the most important one, the kingdom of Jerusalem. Thank you. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to tell your friends. Don't forget to put your likes. Middle Eastern History with Dr. Brovkin.